Tendai Mwari, be thankful unto the Mother, Father, creative life force of the universe. Kudzai Mudzimu Mukulu. Give praises unto our great ancestors, Abibi Tumi, Abibi Fahodie, African power and African liberation for all African people. Greetings and welcome, brothers and sisters, to this special extended read along. And this is something that I'm going to do every now and then as it relates to gotkushTV, yeah, and just engage in an extended read along of one of our great historical or contemporary African-centered Pan-African text, yeah, and we may broaden the net slightly if the subject is relevant to the current plight of African people. But for the most part, we'll be delving into the works of luminaries of African-centered thought, of revolutionary Pan-African thought, of the thought of universal African nationalism, that is to say, Garveyism, and bringing it to the masses of our people. And this is entirely important because there's a lot, of work that the masses of our people are not yet exposed to. And so this is one small contribution into upping the exposure of certain works that elucidate things about our reality, our conditions, and solutions to the problems that we face as African people, just putting it on the platform that it deserves. And so for today, we are going to delve into this great book that you see in front of you, entitled The Blueprint for Black Power, as written by our great ancestor, Nana Amos Wilson. It's one of my favorite books. It's 800 and something pages, and I have had the pleasure of reading it, and I'm overdue a reread, of this text in its entirety. But it is a very, very important book, and an important book for its title and for its subtitle. Its subtitle, which is A Moral, Political and Economic Imperative for the 21st Century. A moral, political and economic imperative for the 21st century. And so it's a very large book that takes on a monumental task of breaking down certain key considerations that we need to engage as African people in pursuit of power towards the attainment of our liberation and our freedom and our sovereignty as a people. And so I'm going to delve into chapter 3 today. We're not going to read the entire chapter, although we are going to read substantial aspects of it, but for the sake of time, we're not going to read the entire chapter. Okay, but this chapter is entitled Social and Cultural Origins of Power. Social and Cultural Origins of Power. And the reason why this particular text and this particular chapter has been chosen for our exploration today is the fact that it is my humble observation that this is one of the key issues that we are facing as African people today. That is to say, it is one of the key hurdles that we have to overcome, which is understanding power, the nature of power, and the fact that all significant power in the geopolitical, economic, and social spheres of human activity exist within a social context, and that is to say, exist within a collective context. All real political, economic, and social power takes place within the context of collectives, groups, and institutions. And the most defining umbrella of social phenomena is the ideal and the phenomena of culture. And so the chapter is entitled The Social and Cultural Origins of Power. And as African people in this day and age, we have to come to terms with the fact that there is an onslaught against us recognizing social and actualizing social and cultural power. There is an attack upon our capacity to recognize ourselves as a social and cultural entity, and therefore our lack of being able to recognize ourselves in said manner directly relates to our ability or lack thereof to act in our own interest. Yeah. So we hear nowadays, what is black really? You know, what is black? You know, what does it really mean to be black? Yes, and a similar set of inquiries exists for African. You know, what is African? Can you even define African? You know, as though it's an impossibility. And whilst those identities are shrouded in impossibility and mystery, identities such as and social formations such as the West exist and go unquestioned and are able, as a result of having a significant amount of institutional organization embedded within such an identification, are able to enforce and enact and actualize social, economic, and political power in today's world. British, American, French, Chinese, Russian, all identifications that relate to a social formation that is organized enough on the institutional level through which to actualize social, political, and economic power. Okay? And so we're going to delve into an analysis as guided by the wisdom of Nana Amos Wilson right about now. And just to say, whenever Nana Amos Wilson uses the terminology African American, he does so because that is his particular starting point, and therefore the audience that he was speaking most directly to, although he obviously, as a Pan-Africanist, speaks to Africans across the diaspora. But where such terminology is used, wherever you are as an African, whether you are in the United Kingdom of Great Britain, as I am currently, whether you are in the Caribbean, whether you are on the continent of Africa or anywhere throughout Europe and the Americas, Asia, Australia, you can feel free to substitute African American for however Africans identify where you are, and ask yourself the question, to what extent does this apply? And so as we commence with the reading, do keep in mind the context, our current context in terms of the Black African identity, its viability, and the extent to which, even within the Black community, said identities and organization around said identities is being attacked and frowned upon, and the purpose that this serves. So, the first subheading that we have from Nana Amos Wilson is culture and power. He begins, social power is situated in that it is embedded in a broader social network or social field. Social power is generated by the social alignment or relative positioning of individuals within groups and the alignment and position of groups vis-a-vis each other or within large social organizations, societies, cultures, nations, and various coalitions or alliances in order to achieve mutually desired ends. One of the most important contexts in which the alignment of individuals and groups is utilized to generate and exercise social power is that of culture. Culture is a type of power system which includes all of its members and the various groups and institutions which constitute it. A society or culture as a power system may be subdivided into a number of smaller and smaller power systems nested within or organically related to one another. The overall power of a culture or society operationally merges from these smaller power systems, which may include familial, kinship, communal, regional, and other types of social and institutional organizations. Okay? So there's a framework, yes, within a culture, okay? And different cultures have different frameworks, but essentially we're talking about an umbrella power system that is undergirded by interrelated units of power systems, yes, that have a symbiotic relationship with each other, in that the broader social, cultural context contributes to reinforcing those subgroups and subdivisions, and those subdivisions in turn reinforce the culture. All right. And so we're emphasizing here the extent to which, as human beings, we are in fact social animals. We are in fact collective creatures. Yes. And we'll get more deeper into the reality of that fact as we go through the reading. And Amos Wilson continues, culture is man's adaptive dimension. Man alone among the forms of animated nature, and he's quoting someone here, is the creature that has moved into an adaptive zone, which is an entirely learned one. This is the zone of culture, the man-made, the learned part of the environment, unquote. And he's quoting Ashley Montague. If societies are to survive, they must minimally satisfy certain biological, psychological, and social needs of their members. They must successfully counter those forces of nature and man which threaten their well-being and their very biological survival. Culture is the social institutional instrument which is crucial for facilitating a people's adaptation to the complexities of their world. Therefore, its functional structure, cohesiveness, resilience, flexibility, responsivity to reality, evolutionary growth and development, or the relative lack thereof, to a very significant extent determine its longevity and quality of life. Culture is learned and is the result of historically and conceptually created designs and patterns for living with the created designs and patterns for living with and relating to others and the cosmos. Yes? And there's some beautiful, I'm reminded, of some beautiful explanations of how this reality is exemplified, yes? Within and given expression within Bukongo cosmology, as explained by Baba Kimwanden de Kiabonseki Fukiyao. And he speaks of the Kinzungi Dila, or the Lukosi, which is your web, your nets, yes, likened to a spider web of life, with you in the center and connecting you. Your web connects you to your social and natural environment. And so your success in life is learning how to negotiate that web or that net of natural connectedness to the environment that is around you. All right. So that's the introduction to the chapter. It gives a brief understanding of what culture is as a social formation and the role that it plays in human development. The next subheading is the family as a power system. Note the subtitle, the family as a power system. Very important. Baba Amos Wilson says, culture is a social machine, a power grid or system. As a holistic system, it is composed of a number of subsystems, power systems in their own right. The family is one such fundamental cultural subsystem. Family is a subsystem within a culture. Okay? So as much as individuals exist within a cultural context, so do families exist within a cultural context. Yes, in fact, the concept of individual or family, and especially individual, doesn't even make sense outside of a social and cultural environment to a significant degree. Yeah. The family is one such fundamental cultural subsystem. It is a subsystem of social relations, hierarchical in structure, where different members exercise different privileges, prerogatives, and different levels of authority. The family is a primary organization, a fundamental generator or source of power, where the human and non-human capital resources of its members are pooled and shared as a means of achieving its vital goals. These goals include sexual reproduction, socialization of its children, securing a common habitation, providing protection and affectional relations among its members, maintaining and enhancing the social status of its members, and providing for their economic well-being. Yeah. And so nowadays, because we often engage relationships that eventually create families on the level of romance. Yeah, oftentimes we're not acculturated, so to speak, to understand family within this context. Yeah, understand the social, political, and economic problems and desires and needs that the creation and sustenance of family is designed to achieve, solve, meet. And so this is why I love this exposition from Nana Amos Wilson, especially when he breaks down the goals, yes, that families pursue. One is sexual reproduction. Two, socialization of the children. Children are socialized within the family context. Securing a common habitation, yes, house and land. All right, ain't nothing going on but the rent. Yeah, providing protection and affectional relations among its members. Family, simple as you take it, is a means of protecting, yes, a group of people, in particular the children of a particular family unit and the unions within that family unit. But it also says affectional relations, yes? So this is how we relate to each other, satisfying our affective needs for human contact, for love, for affirmation, yes, within the group, for recognition, yes. There is an affectional need within human beings that is met through the development and the sustenance of family structures. All right. Maintaining and enhancing the social status of its members and providing for their economic well-being. And I won't go into any further detail here because we'll get into some a little bit later in the reading. The family is a system where power is customarily and legally exercised, where its members are not only related by kinship ties, by blood and a shared history, but relate to each other in terms of membership rights, duties, behavioral expectations, and authority. That's what happens when every Saturday you have your chores and you have to do your chores. That's what happens when you get rules like the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning, son, is make your bed. That's what happens when there's a rota for washing up the dishes. That's what happens when the older children have to take responsibility for looking after the younger children. That's what happens when children get sent to grandma and grandpa for the holidays or the weekend. That's what happens when families gather, yes, for the birthday of the son, the daughter, the nephew, the niece, the uncle, the auntie, the grandma, and engage in rituals of reinforcement and taking care of that loved one. Yes, that's what happens when there is discord in the family and the family gathers to solve those problems, because membership of the family gives you a certain right to contribute to the problem solving. Your voice is a necessary component of the problem solving activity of the family dynamic. All right, and we know that's what happens when grandma speak. Everybody just listen, because we know I say grandma is grandma. I just say it go. Authority. All right. The character and personality of individual family members, especially its young, are developed, shaped, and continuously influenced by the organization and exercise of power and authority inside and outside the family unit. Consequently, the family as a power system markedly influences its members, particularly its young's attitudes toward and relationships to power and authority, both within and without the family. Thus, listen carefully now, there is an important continuity between the nature of power, its quantity, quality, and organization within the family, and the nature of social and power relations between the family and its physical and social environment, including other families and institutions which together constitute a larger social system, such as a clan, tribe, nation, or culture. Now, this is entirely important because we have to also consider the fact that family in and of itself is a cultural product. Not all family structures and systems within all cultures are the same. Yeah. For example, I was recently in Ghana, and something that you know already, but when you're interacting with brothers and sisters, things are reinforced, and you're able to teach the young people that are around you certain things and learn certain new dynamics yourself. Yeah. And so one of the aspects of this is what we call cousin, yes, in European culture doesn't exist in indigenous Akan culture, for example, or at least doesn't exist in relationship to the children of your mother's brothers and sisters. The children of your mother's brothers and sisters are your brothers and sisters. Yeah, because the culture within the Akan is fundamentally matrilineal, and so there's a precedent, yeah, placed upon the family of your mother's side relational to yourself. Your mother's sisters are not your aunties; they are your mothers. Yes. All right. There are some other indigenous African cultures whereby the entire mother side of the family is your mother and the entire father side of the family is your father. Yes. And so I say that to say that we must differentiate now family and what that means from an African point-centered perspective and a Eurocentric perspective. Yes, within British society, for example, within Western society, they tend to define family as mother, father, and 2.2 children. Yes, mother, father, and 2.2 children. 2.2 being the average, yeah, which was recorded in British society at a particular point in time. But that definition of family would be inadequate, yes, if we step out of the Eurocentric mold and particularly the Anglo-Saxon mold for defining family. And so within that context, yes, because family is a cultural product and different families are reinforced differently, the kinds of behaviors and social organizations and authorities, yes, that are reinforced within those different family structures will be different and produce different results. Okay, entirely important for us to understand that. And then, as Nana Amos Wilson has said here, that now has a relationship to the broader context. So it has become popular in Western society as far as social aggregation is concerned to legitimize only the individual and the family. I believe Maggie Thatcher is famous for having said that, well, within the context of there being no such thing as society, there's only individuals, there's family, and that's it. Yes? Completely negating the social context in which family is created, sustained, developed, and producing. Yes? So it's an inadequate definition because it doesn't take consideration of that broader context. And as Amos Wilson has said here, we're talking about the broader context of, depending on your environment, clan, tribe, nation, or culture. Yes? Without that broader understanding, we have no context for how new and extensions of the family are created and developed. Okay? All right? That's very, very important. Nana Amos Wilson continues. Hence, the effective nature of power, because remember our concern here is power, generated and exercised by a culture, is intimately and reciprocally related to and dependent on the effective nature of the power generated by its family and other subcultural units. Again, the effective nature of power generated and exercised by a culture is intimately and reciprocally related to and dependent on the effective nature of the power generated by its family and other subcultural units. Yeah. To draw on the example that I was given prior to, in terms of the indigenous Akan or Ashanti lineage structure, it's matrilineal. And what that means is that as far as inheritance, as far as the distribution of wealth within the family, that matrilineity affects that structure. Yes? And so there's a saying that we was taught, yeah? There's a saying that we was taught. And forgive me because I'm unable to say this in Tree at this moment in time. But the saying is that if you remove a father from the family will be weakened. If you remove the mother if you remove the father or the man from the family will be weakened. If you remove the mother or the woman, the family ceases to exist, or words to that effect. Yes, and that saying gives expression to the family structure of the Akan. And so where definitive aspects of that family are removed or broken down, then it has an impact upon the capacity of that institution to function. yes, and to function relative to its broader clan and nationhood and cultural context. And if there is a pervasive breakdown within across family structures, family units within that system, that will have an impact upon the strength of the broader cultural system in general and vice versa. Nana Amos Wilson continues, generally the power generated by a culture derives from the structured coalescence and interdependent family kinship groups. Clans or tribes form mutual defense against outsiders and other mutually beneficial outcomes. So families come together, create clans and other kinship ties for the sake of achieving goals that they cannot achieve as individual separated families. Yes? This coalescence of subcultural social units is usually organized and motivated by a mutually recognized leadership or governing establishment. This establishment usually fulfills its responsibilities through the creation, issuance, and enforcement of policies. At this level of organization, a culture may be defined as a political organization which exercises political power in its defense, economic and social interests as a whole, and in the interest of its subcultural group and individual members. Entirely important, we must understand that family is a political institution. And to depoliticize a people's understanding of the institution of power, of family, let me start the sentence again. To depoliticize a people's understanding of the political nature of the institution of family is to disempower said people. As Dye contends, Baba Amos Wilson continues, quote, true political power organizations begin with the development of power relationships between family and kinship groups. He goes on to state, the habitual association of human beings in communities or local groups generally leads to the introduction of some sort of political power organization. The basic power structures are voluntary alliances of families and clans who acknowledge the same leaders, habitually work together in economic enterprises, agree to certain ways of conduct for the maintenance of peace among themselves, and cooperate in the conduct of offensive and defensive warfare. Thus, power structures begin with the development of cooperation between families and kinship groups. Warfare frequently leads to another purpose for power structures ruling and exploiting. Warfare frequently leads to another purpose for power structures, ruling and exploiting people who have been conquered in war. Well-organized and militarily successful tribes learn to subjugate other peoples for purposes of political and economic exploitation, retaining them as subjects. The power structure of the conquering tribes takes on another function, that of maintaining control over and exploiting conquered peoples, unquote. And that was an extended quote from Dye, as Brother Nana Amos Wilson was sharing. Nana Amos Wilson himself continues, if we substitute the phrase economically successful tribes for the phrase militarily successful tribes in the latter italicized paragraph above, and think in terms of economic and political warfare instead of military warfare, we would more closely approximate the contemporary political economic relations between white Americans and immigrant Americans and black Americans in the contemporary United States, black Africans in the contemporary United Kingdom of Great Britain, black Africans in the contemporary island of Jamaica or Haiti, black Africans in the contemporary nation of Congo or South Africa. Anywhere we're there, this analogy applies. If we replace the idea of military warfare with that of economic and political warfare. What does Nana Amos Wilson mean? That is, he says, the rather superior organization of family, kinship, and communal groups and resources of the white Americans and various immigrant groups have facilitated their political and economic exploitation of the African American community. Besides the fact that the organizations are based on family, kinship, community, and ethnic relationships, they are based more profoundly on cultural identity, values, and attitudes. That is to say, the context for their families is designed to reinforce the cultural identity, values, and attitudes of the group. A culture generates effective power when it aligns its subcultural, social, and individual units, especially its family and communal units, in such ways that they can most effectively create and exploit its human, social, and material resources to its own advantage relative to its environment and other groups or cultures. So we recognize, yes, that cultures are very rarely monolithic. Very rarely, if ever. Yes? That every culture, especially as the culture develops and evolves and the systems within it become more complex, has an inherent level of variety and variation within it. Yes? But the power of that culture is most effective when those variations, as expressed and manifested in their subcultural groups and the sub-social formation and the individuals within it, align with, as he expresses in relation to white Americans, a cultural identity, values, and attitudes. Yes? When the subcultural, so like the micro and the macro, are aligned in such a way as to develop enough institutional organization that the members of the group are able to have impact on enough material resources for the group as a whole to take advantage of. Enough social cohesion for the group as a whole to take advantage of. And that social cohesion and the material resources that operate within enable that group to relate from a position of power in relationship to other groups. I do hope ones and ones are following the reading so far. The Social and Cultural Origins of Power, Chapter 3 in the Blueprint for Black Power, as written and brought to us by Nana Amos Wilson. And I must pause for a moment to pay homage to an elder who is still with us, Baba Sababu Plata. And the reason why it is appropriate to do so is because of the fact that Baba Sababu is the co-founder of African World Info Systems, which is the publishing institution that Nana Amos Wilson also founded. He co-founded the institution with Nana Amos Wilson. And Nana Amos Wilson passed away in 1995, yes? On the cusp of the completion of this book. Yeah, the book was virtually completed. It had some editing to do, and you know, some elements to develop on. Yeah, but he passed away in January of 1995, and Baba Sababu completed the work, and continues to complete the work. And so the book was actually published a few years later in 1998. Yeah, and so whenever we honor Nana Amos Wilson, we do have to honor Baba Sababu Plata for you know, continuing to publish and keep Nana Amos Wilson's name and work alive. And so we thank you, Baba Sababu. So Nana Amos Wilson goes on. The next subheading is Black American Culture and Identity. He goes on to explain, go into a bit more depth in terms of what culture is and defining it. I'm not going to read that today, but it is a very important subheading. I'm going to skip to the next subheading, which is Cultural, Social, and Personal Identity. Cultural, Social, and Personal Identity. Nana Amos Wilson continues. The cultural identity of an individual or group is the social product of a socialization process, a process in which new responses, values, perspectives, and orientations are acquired, and existing behavioral repertoires of the individual or group are modified to some extent as the result of his or its subjection to direct or indirect social conditioning experiences. Cultural identity also results from the patterning of its modal thoughts, feelings, or actions after other cultures or groups who serve as models. Yes? So we're looking at here how cultural identity develops on the individual and the group level. Entirely important. Yes? And so we're talking about a process of developing certain values that impact our modes of behavior. We learn certain ways of responding to phenomena. Yes? One of the key examples of this is language. Language, we all have our idiosyncratic ways of expressing ourselves and speaking. No one individual speaks exactly the same as another individual. But language is, and the expression of speech in general, is only sufficient and effective to the extent that there is a basic level of understanding. Yes, between those who use it. That's the only context in which it makes sense. Yeah, and so we are taught to speak, how to speak, and how to express ourselves for the sake of having others understand what we are saying and for the sake of understanding what others are saying. It's a very basic example that we can often overlook. All right. The reader may wonder, listen carefully, why we include cultural identity as a group phenomena as the result of a socialization process. So it might make sense, right, that the individual is socialized within the context of the group. But cultural identity, yes, one may assume is a self-generated, self-sustaining phenomena. That is a cultural, that is to say, a cultural identity is that which socializes the individuals. But Nana Amos Wilson asks, the reader may wonder why we include cultural identity as a group phenomena as the result of a socialization process, something ordinarily used to explain the development of personal and individual identity. Can a culture be socialized? We believe it can, especially when a distinct subcultural group is, to a large extent, embedded, completely dependent on, controlled, structured, and conditioned by a totalitarian dominant culture. This is particularly the case when the members who constitute the subculture have been uprooted and isolated from and have lost knowledge of their own original culture and been forced to adopt the new strange one. We're going back now to what Nana Amos was saying earlier in terms of substituting military war for the idea of political economic warfare. We have to have a war analysis. So in the context where a people group have been ripped from their culture or have had significant institutions, for example, the family within their culture, negatively affected, damaged, and or destroyed, that phenomena leaves that culture open to a socialization process by a dominant culture. This is particularly the case when the members who constitute the subculture have been uprooted and isolated from and have lost knowledge of their own original culture and have been forced to adopt the new strange one. Black American culture, Black British culture, I'm going to get strange, Black Jamaican culture, Black Ghanaian culture. Yes, me say it. Culture in large part is the socialized product of historical and power relations between white and black Americans. Consequently, Black American cultural identity, while riddled with indigenous African elements, residuals, and fundaments, is still an amalgamated product of the American experience, primarily conditioned by dominant whites who do not have the best interests of blacks in mind or at heart. One of the ways in which I've expressed this in my life is the idea that we have, as a people, since the onset of the Ma'afa, the invasion, conquest, trafficking, enslavement, colonization, and neocolonization of African people, developed culture of resistance and culture of assimilation or accommodation. Yeah. Culture of resistance to those forces which seek to maintain us in the context of Ma'afa. In this day and age, colonization, neocolonization. And also cultures of assimilation into the neocolonial system. Culture of accommodation with the neocolonial system. But because the neocolonial system is dominant within societal, political, economic affairs, until the culture of resistance assumes a certain level of critical mass or significant power, the culture of assimilation or accommodation tends even to dominate the cultural effectiveness of African people wherever we are in the world. So even when the beauty of our culture expresses itself through the mediums of culture, language, names, food, garments, ceremonies, rituals, music, dance, arts, crafts, agriculture, sports, games, recreation. We can use African languages, eat African food. We can maintain our African linguistics expressions through the patois and the Creole that we have in the Americas. We can maintain and evolve African music and dance forms in reggae dancehall, hip hop, blues, samba, salsa, compa. Yeah, we can evolve all of these forms, soca, kaisa. Yes, we can evolve all of these forms, and yet even though so much of that expression ties us back to our original culture, ties us forward to our original culture, and gives us a signpost for even deeper creative cultural production, the reality is that all of that Africanness and African expression can exist in a geopolitical, social, economic environment that is dominated and controlled by colonizers and neo-colonizers. Which is why whereas we produce cultural creative forms, the rewards that are often reaped from that cultural production tend to benefit people other than ourselves more than it benefits us. Consequently, Black American cultural identity, whilst riddled with indigenous African cultural elements, residuals and fundaments, is still an amalgamated product of the American experience, primarily conditioned by dominant whites who do not have the best interest of blacks in mind or at heart. Dagger quite aptly describes socialization as quote, the most efficient and effective means of social control. It is through the socialization process that the necessary ingredients for social order are instilled in the personality. Or in the context of this discussion, the subordinate culture. The socialization of a subordinate culture involves the inculcation of its young with values and attitudes that serve to perpetuate the dominant social system. A realistic and objective analysis of the social structure and dynamics of American society, particularly those pertaining to white-black relations, will vividly reveal that blacks are doubly socialized, i.e., first, by the environing of the dominant white culture, and second, reactively and proactively by partly indigenous black culture. Consequently, black culture and each of its members are introjected with and afflicted by the double consciousness so famously defined by W.E.B. Du Bois. Hence, with little modification, Dagger's definition applies equally to individuals and the subordinate black culture. Let me stop for a second here, because I'm reminded of the wisdom of Baba Kobi Kambon, author of the book Cultural Misorientation and also African Personality in America. And there's a speech that he has where he challenges Du Bois' notion of what he understands of Du Bois' notion of double consciousness. And he says that in terms of his work as a social psychologist, so to speak, he finds Du Bois' analysis of double consciousness problematic, because he says that it creates an equivalency. Yes, it puts on equal terms our original consciousness as African people and the Eurocentric consciousness that we've been inculcated with as a result of the Ma'afa, as a result of invasion, conquest, colonization, etc. And he says that that equivalency is problematic, yes, because in one sense, it could lead to the legitimization of the quote-unquote American consciousness or the Eurocentric consciousness as far as it operates within and among African people. That this is somehow the natural order of things, yes? And Baba Kobi Kambon, suggests that, in words, the presence of Anglo-American consciousness among African people is in fact a manifestation of mental illness, so to speak. It's the manifestation of a misorientation. So we should really treat the Anglo-American consciousness as an alien consciousness that we should reject in the pursuit of our own interest as African people. One of the reasons why he says this is because he believes that there's a relationship between Du Bois' double consciousness and ideas that develop later, such as bicultural competency. Yes, that our aim is to basically be able to negotiate, yes, our indigenous African selves and the Eurocentric indoctrination and find some kind of happy medium between these two phenomena. And what he's suggesting is that no, this is actually, as I was alluding to earlier, an example of a culture of accommodation and assimilation of and into the systems of our oppressors and colonizers. And so we need to reject the criminal and his colonization and affirm ourselves in our fullness, is the point that Baba Kobi Kambon is making. So he challenges Du Bois' double consciousness on that basis. But we can go into the permutations of that in deeper detail another time. So now the Amos Wilson continues, hence, with little modification, Dagger's definition applies equally to individuals and the subordinate black culture. Quote, socialization broadly defined is the process by which the infant, or as Nana Amos Wilson is saying, or subordinate culture, so he's likening the infant in Dagger's definition to subordinate culture, in this instance, black culture or African culture as manifested under the systems of white power colonization and neo-colonization. Yeah, that's a subordinate culture. Yes, learns the ways a given social group, the dominant culture, and is molded into an effective participant. So the infant or subordinate culture learns the ways of the dominant culture, yes, or the bigger social group, and is molded to be an effective participant. Coming back to the example that I was given earlier. yes, we are molded into being effective participants in dominant white culture, because even though we produce all this beautiful music, our aspirations and goals tend to be guided by recognition in our FIDEM system. We create blues, jazz, mento, kaiso, reggae, soukous, amapiano, Afrobeat and Afrobeats, high life, hip life, etc. And then make the Grammy, an award provided by the American music industry, the #1 attainment for all our genres collectively. Why? Because we are molded into being effective participants within a dominant culture. Dagger adds, then Amos Wilson says, because, quote, because of imperfections in this process, the infant, in parenthesis, subordinate culture, whenever Dagger says infant, Nana Amos Wilson is likening this now to a broader context of dominant culture and subordinate culture. The infant subordinate culture is not completely molded, but in the course of its development, it acquires behavior, attitudes, values, and other personality, cultural traits that are at once unique to him and at the same time characteristic of the group or groups dominant culture that serve as the socializing agent. Yeah, this is one of them ones where I find a lot of infantile reasoning sometimes when we discuss these things. For example, you say, well, somebody might say, yeah, well, Europe was united in Mass European War II. At least Western Europe was united in Mass European War II. And some fool is going to get up and say, well, no, they weren't, because this individual or this subgroup disagreed with what Western Europe were doing, or some people supported the Nazis, yeah, which is true, right? You know what I'm saying, to a significant degree at different points. Western Europe has, generally speaking, had a lot of cross-fertilization between its ideologies in all of the Western Europe sphere, so to speak. All right, that's a reality, yes. But again, nobody is to have a culture is not to say that every single individual at all times does the same thing at the same time. It's not to have a culture is not to suggest monolith among all individuals and all subgroups at all times. It's not intelligent reasoning to suggest that. What is being suggested is that there is enough institutional, operational, and principled cohesion that the macrocosm or social group is able to operate and behave effectively in certain ways and exercise power in areas of people activity. That is what is being suggested here. Okay? All right. Dagger contends, and that also continues, that the socialization process is facilitated by the process called identification. He defines identification as the process by which the infant, and in the present context of discussion, the subordinate black culture, becomes or behaves like some other or others, and or like others expect. The final three words particularly apropos the oppressed blacks. In other words, those three words are like others expect. Yes? We are modeled in such a way to identify as others would expect us to identify, to behave as others would expect us to behave. It involves psychological processes and includes motives, both conscious and unconscious, during and following the identification. The adult or dominant culture, normally in control of the resources, dispenses them according to the desirability of the behavior performed by the infant or subordinate culture. The infant subordinate culture will identify, i.e. behave the way he is expected to behave, or attempt to imitate, usually in a considerably caricature manner, the attitudes and behavior of his role model. With the adult dominant culture, because he or it is dependent on him, the dominant culture, in order to receive certain rewards and avoid punishments of various kinds. The infant subordinate culture will be motivated to conform to expected behavior, or barring this, engage in various forms of deviant behavior in order to attain the same equivalent ends. So, as I was speaking about culture of resistance and culture of assimilation and accommodation, to put that in that same analogy, to put what Amos Wilson is saying here in that same analogy, it's the idea that within the white power structure, Africans will be rewarded for engaging in and seeking to promote and develop culture of assimilation and accommodation to the oppressive system. Yes? Whereas culture of resistance will be punished. And there's an interesting punished and or negated, ignored. There's an interesting dynamic taking place at the moment as far as the rise of the social media era is concerned, as far as I see it. And there's a phenomena in black media at the moment, which I refer to as the black conservative industrial complex, which is effectively significant amount of resources and platforms that are being given to black people who are willing to identify as quote unquote black conservative, right wing, etc. Or any synonyms thereof. Yes. And the promotion of said individuals or groups of individuals in mainstream media. Yes. So this is not just simply, there are black people that think a certain way. We're talking about the active promotion and platforming of black people that have ideas commensurate with white conservatism. And one of the things that I'm noticing is, to the extent that white media has developed these platforms for said individuals, what might be considered black independent media also now feels obligated to provide platform for said individuals. And it may not be the case that the independent black media that platforms those ideas necessarily agrees with them, but they've become so popular and mainstream and given such a pervasive voice that in order to be considered legitimately engaging in black media and discourse on black issues, you have to profile those voices. At the same time, the revolutionary Pan African nationalist voices are easily overlooked, negated, ignored, and when they are acknowledged, are generally speaking acknowledged in the context of caricaturing. So those ideas and those who hold them are generally not engaged in person able to express those ideas. They're generally engaged as caricatures. One of the main ones is the Hotep. Yeah, you will find, and I have heard, black independent media of almost every kind. Yes, hot topics, you know, those that chat about Love Island, and Big Brother, to hip hop podcasts that are talking about current and historical events and dynamics of hip hop culture, to more serious news, politics, journalism type, independent black media, and everything in between. Yeah, from varying different perspectives on the spectrum of Western politics. Yeah, right, left, center, and so on and so forth. I've heard all of them promote the caricature of the Hotep, whilst very few, if any, speak to anybody who might be considered a Hotep. All right? Yeah? So this is one way in which the ideas and dictates of the dominant social order influence even what might be considered independent media within the black subculture. Yeah, we platform and engage voices that are given legitimacy by them and ignore those that they would have us ignore. Finally, on this point, to deal with Brother Amos Wilson's last sentence here, where he says, or barring this, engage in various forms of deviant behavior in order to attain the same equivalent ends. Yeah, society, the education system is a central institution within Western society, within any society, really. And it's well known, in sociology, that there's a significant relationship between your success within the education system, how far you go within it, and your social mobility or your attainment levels in society at large. Yeah, so there's a significant relationship between school exclusion and entry into the criminal justice system and entry into actual prison. Yes, within Western society. However, what we have to note is that a difference in terms of the legitimacy, yes, of the behavior or lack thereof as defined by the society in which we live, does not necessarily represent an appreciable difference in the values of those who engage in said activities and what they are trying to achieve. Yeah, the drug dealer is often working off the same value system and trying to achieve the same ends as the professional footballer, doctor, lawyer. Generally speaking, operating in a material society that prioritizes the acquisition of material possessions. Yeah? Generally speaking. Okay? So whether it's considered deviant or not, same ends are being attained. Now Amos Wilson continues, moreover, identification involves the process by which the individual or group is socialized to acquire those attitudes, values, interests, morals, ethics, tastes, skills, emotional and behavioral tendencies, and ways of thinking that the socializer deems appropriate to the person's gender, the person's, or in this case, whites and blacks, the group's race and social role. In other words, identification refers to the process of fitting a person or group to its ascribed or prescribed social role. The social role for which the person or group is fitted is usually the ones the socializer perceives as important in supporting his or its own position and in achieving or satisfying his or its goals and needs, or in terms of group relations, important to supporting, enhancing, and empowering and helping the socializing group to achieve its economic, political, social, psychological objectives. Create, black people, your most beautiful works of art, as long as you don't create an economic system around said art that detrimentally impacts our capacity to enrich ourselves off of it. Africa can rise. The Africa Rising narrative is popular nowadays, and it's been endorsed by, major institutions within the global economic system dominated by the West. So Africa can rise economically as long as Africa Rising doesn't detrimentally impact the economic power of the West and the West's capacity to enrich itself of Africa's rising economies. The moment that dynamic takes place, economic sanctions. Yeah, that's the thing go. Economic sanctions to reggae. Alright? The socialized individual or group is considered to have achieved his or its identity when he or it behaves and thinks in ways benefiting his or its social roles as designated by the socializer, and accepts his or its social roles voluntarily or as natural. Or as destined for himself or itself. Depending on the socialized individual's or group's own autonomous characteristics, the nature of the relationships he or it has with the socializer, the attitudes he or it has regarding the socializer, and the particular conditions under which his or its socialization takes place, the socialized individual or group may be inadvertently fitted to a social role identity whose behavioral, emotional, and cognitive tendencies may be opposed to those of the socializer. This defiant role identity is powerful or effective. This defiant social role identity, if powerful or effective, will threaten to upset the social order or relations intended by the socializer. Under an oppressive socializing regime, the social role identities achieved by the socialized person or group, though opposed to his or its oppression, may yet be self-defeating or self-destructive and inadvertently self-subordinating. Some social role identities of individuals or groups, while diametrically opposed to those intended by the socializer, may still unwittingly operate to empower the socializer and strengthen and maintain the social order and relations they defy. Yeah, and so this thing is entirely very complex. All right, the first point here, again, the socialized individual or group is considered to have achieved his or its identity when he or it behaves and thinks in ways befitting his or its social roles as designated by the socializer, and accepts his or its roles voluntarily or as natural, as destined for himself or itself. This is what is happening now, like where more of us are identifying as British, yeah, in the UK, and more of us are identifying as British in the context of, well, what else could we be? It's like the only possibility. Yes, and not only is it the only possibility, it is the aspiration to be absorbed and recognized as a part of British society and British history, and to be recognized for our contributions to it. Yes, and we are rewarded when we come to this conclusion as though it's of our own making. It's a voluntary and natural inclination because we've lived here for 2-3 generations. Yes, without ever questioning the extent to which that trajectory and aspiration and that desire to be recognized is a role designated by the socializer in that environment, which is the white man, the British white man. And the British white man will embrace us as British to the extent that that identification does not sufficiently challenge his social order, and indeed reinforces it. However, it is possible for the subordinated group, he says, depending on the socialized individuals or group's own autonomous characteristics, depending if they have a strong culture of resistance, for example, the nature of the relationship he or it has with the socializer, the attitudes he or it has regarding the socializer. Do we see the socializer and the systems of the socializer as our highest aspiration, or do we reject those systems? For example, do we look up to the socializer, or do we look down upon him? And particularly the conditions under which his or its socialization takes place, the socialized individual or group may be inadvertently fitted to a social role identity whose behavioral, emotional, and cognitive tendencies may be opposed to that of the socializer. This defiant social role identity, if powerful or effective, will threaten to or upset the social order or relations intended by the socializer. Under an oppressive socializing regime, the social role identities achieved by the socialized person or group, though opposed to his or its oppression, may yet be self-defeating or self-destructive. So you can reject the norms, yeah, of the socializer, you know what I'm saying, the socializer will demonize the criminal underground whilst controlling it. And in rejection of the system, yes, one may find themselves subject to the machinations of the quote-unquote criminal underground, yes? And sometimes that engagement is on some level within the consciousness of the individual an act of rejection of the system. I don't want to be, to be recognized, yes, within your social order in that kind of way. All right. But while diametrically opposed to those intended by the socializer, this behavior may still unwittingly operate to empower the socializer and strengthen and maintain the social order and the relations they defy. Another way, another probably more subtle example of this is our assimilationist tendencies. Yeah. So because we are rejected by the system, we may take a stance of civil disobedience against the system. But if the goal of our civil disobedience is simply to be included within the system, even though our civil disobedience is going to disrupt the social order temporarily, ultimately, our major aim lends itself to simply reinforcing the social order, even as we challenge it. So our next subheading in this reading is the need for a new African self-identity. After all of that, yes, we get to the first conclusion as it relates to African people and this issue of social, cultural origins of power, which is the need for a new African self-identity. Under certain socio-economic circumstances, cultural identity can become the instrument for the expression of the power of the predominant cultural system which molded it, and may also become the instrument used by the dominant culture and its members to further its survival and enhance its empowerment. Black cultural identity, even in its stratified and diffuse state, even on the individual level, is a political economy, or essentially an organization of lacks, deficiencies, interests, needs, desires, passions, tastes, ideals, motives, values, etc. The response to which on the part of blacks helps to maintain or enhance the social power, relations, prerogatives, and integrity of the white dominant racial status quo. In the context of white American supremacy, African Americans must ask ourselves, Africans in Britain, Jamaica, Congo, Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, Ethiopia, Sudan, Zimbabwe, must ask ourselves, what is the political economy of oppressed black culture and the various personal and social identities it produces? Africans in Haiti, in Suriname, in Trinidad and in Barbados, in St. Lucia, Dominica, Brazil, must ask ourselves, what is the political economy of oppressed black culture and the various personal and social entities it produces? We must no longer, through the abuse of reality, denial and distortion, fail to recognize that our basic identities as an oppressed people are largely socially manufactured by the white-dominated American culture and its related social practices, in which we as a people are immersed. These identities are therefore incarnations and instruments of their social power and are socially designed and conditioned when activated to unwittingly serve the political economic interests of dominant white America to the detriment of subordinate black culture. We must take that for read. Yes? We must just understand that as a given reality of the current moment. We must not fool ourselves and flatter ourselves and each other. We must be real in this time about where we are and our current condition. But he goes on, African American cultural identity and behavioral orientations as currently defined are functionally defined to perpetuate self-negating, self-defeating, and under certain circumstances, self-destructive behavior in black Americans. The salvation, empowerment, and liberation of African peoples require an appropriate, thorough, pragmatic, cultural analysis of the deculturation and reculturation of ourselves by dominant European peoples of reactionary black culture and their social product as represented by reactionary black identities. We must analyze how these identities, whether considered pro-social or antisocial, function to maintain the oppressive power of whites and the subordinate powerlessness of blacks. Our salvation further requires that we perceive white supremacy as the major social, political, economic, and spiritual problem to be solved by African peoples, and that we ask and answer definitively the questions: what kind of culture must we construct in order to overthrow white supremacy? What kinds of social identities, relations, arrangements, alignments, institutions, values, etc., which when actualized will allow us to attain and protect our liberty, enhance our quality of life? What kinds of what kinds of socialization practices must we institute in order to empower ourselves to become the kinds of people we must become if we are to secure our right to be free? Certainly, the answers lie in the direction of the reclamation of our African identity, the reconstitution of our African-centered consciousness, supported by commensurate African-centered cultural, social, political, and economic values, institutions, and relations. There is so much in those few paragraphs, brothers and sisters, on the need for a new African self-identity. This is a critical issue for the now. As I began saying, yes, there is a heightened amount of confusion being perpetuated and promoted around black identity in the 21st century at this moment in time. Some are we well British, black British now. We are black Americans, not African Americans, as the discussion has been recently taking place. We are Aboriginal, indigenous to the Americas. We are Hebrew Israelites. Yes? And so on and so forth. And one of the defining threads that you see throughout all of those sensibilities is a rejection of African identity, one, and within that context, a rejection of an identity that facilitates and encourages a relationship to Africans not domiciled where we are. And even within the black conscious community, these sensibilities have seeped in and are being weaponized against the Pan-African, the African nationalist within that context. And so because the Pan-African, the African nationalist affirmation of an African identity does not serve to maintain and sustain the current power relations that see dominant white culture, political and economic institutions as the most powerful, it must be discredited. And there are many otherwise intelligent brothers and sisters who have fallen prey to this psychological attack. So there was a book released recently in this country, in Britain, called "This Is Not America." Yes, This Is Not America. It's written by a brother who is parents of migrants from Nigeria. And the entire premise of the book is to suggest that the race relations in Britain have been defined by superimposing race relations from America onto the Black British experience. And the purpose is to paint Britain as this bastion of multiculturalism and acceptance of Black people. That's the most obvious aim. But really and truly, the aim of the book is to delegitimize the solidarity that Africans in Britain have with Africans in America on the basis of being African, being Black. The author and those who promote this nonsense never question the legitimacy of the geopolitical cultural structure known as the West. Never question the Anglo-American relationship, which is defined between America and Britain as a special relationship. Because within the current geopolitical order, the West is a legitimate entity that not only must be maintained, but must maintain dominance. And so that sensibility recognizes a global African identity as a threat to its domination. Therefore, Africans who align with Britishness implicitly must act based upon British interests. That's what's taking place. So the African identity must be delegitimized. The African identity must be delegitimized to such an extent that even the Black conscious community must become a battleground on this issue. That popular voices within it must begin to question and to delegitimize this connection, this identity, this cultural framework as inherently flawed, unattainable, undesirable, and impossible. Whilst at the same time wittingly or unwittingly accepting the dominant social frameworks of white power. So we question the legitimacy of an African identity, but not a Nigerian identity or an Ivorian identity. Another question, why is there a country called the Ivory Coast in 2024? Where does that come from? Why is there a country called South Africa? Where that come from? Why does the World Trade Organization control the prices of resources in Caribbean and the African continent? Never question those things, but the African identity must be questioned. And so therefore, we are being socialized against developing social organizations and institutions that can legitimately challenge white power. Adatagwan, kings and queens. And so consider this part one. Consider this part one of our extended read of social and cultural origins of power, taken from the Blueprint for Black Power as written by Nana Amos Wilson. In part two, we'll delve into some of the other topics that Nana Amos Wilson explores within this subheading. I look forward to seeing you there, brothers and sisters. Until such time, Tendai Mwari. Be thankful unto the Mother, Father, Creative Life Force of the Universe. Kudzai Mudzimu Mukulu. Give praises unto our great ancestors. Abibi Tumi, Abibi Fahodiye, African power and African liberation for all African people. Ashe, Ashe, Ashe.